I'm standing on the port side of the pilot house, and I went all stop with both engines, and I'm holding on to the controls, and the tug is rolling. She goes all the way over on her side, and I'm hanging onto the controls. I'm dangling in the air in the pilot house. The tug's on its side. How we didn't ended up sinking, I'll never know. We go over the wake of a Staten Island ferry, and he's up to like full speed on a bicycle. The back wheel jumps off of the contraption, and the rubber met the road.
Love listening to Deck Tales? Be sure to smash that subscribe button so you never miss a seaworthy story, fascinating insight, or incredible behind-the-scenes moment. Climb aboard, stay shipshape, and catch every episode fresh off the boat the second it drops. Ahoy ahoy to all you smooth sailors out there, and welcome aboard the Deck Tales podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sammy Catlin, and this is where we dive headfirst into life at sea. From stunning destinations to unexpected storms, our guests have stories that will make you laugh, gasp, and maybe even shed a tear. Whether you're a seasoned sea dog or simply curious about life on board, Deck Tales is your boarding pass to a world of nautical narratives. My guest today is Mr. Eric Takakjian. He spent nearly 5 decades wrangling the ocean, from record-breaking deep-water drill ships to towing behemoth vessels across the open seas. He survived capsizes, blowouts, and more close calls than he can count. A true salt-of-the-earth captain, and when things go wrong out there, he's the guy you want on the controls. So let's anchor up and dive right in.
Hi, Sam.
Hello, Eric. Good afternoon, good evening. How are you, sir?
Good. How you doing?
I'm not too bad at all. That's a fine setup you've got behind you going on there, Eric.
Oh, yes. I'm sitting in my office. I got all sorts of stuff here.
Where is it that you're based?
I'm in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, on the east coast of the U.S., south of Boston and north of New York.
Oh, very nice. And how long you been there for?
I've been in Massachusetts since 1980.
So pretty much most of your life, I'm guessing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So it was there. I'm just trying to remember. Was it Jen Saletti, the shipwreck salvager, scuba diver,
right,
that connected us?
Yes.
And I've just been going over my notes. You've had some career, my friend. You've been on all of them, haven't you? Are you collecting like happy families of ships?
Yeah. Well, I started in 1978.
That's right, yes.
And, over time, that's kind of what happens at the end of my career. I got another year, and then I'm done. I'll wrap it up.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So just so people are aware, just to briefly summarize, if it's possible, Eric, from what you told me already, you've worked on almost every kind of ship that you can imagine. So that includes big tugboats and barge units that go ashore, small tugboats that work coastlines and harbours, a passenger ship, a deep water drilling ship, a scientific research ship, and offshore service boats. You've also inspected and surveyed working fishing boats and commercial cargo vessels. Have I missed any out?
Well, that pretty much sums it up. Like ocean-going tugs. I started out in the Coast Guard. I did 4.5 years active duty in the Coast Guard, and I got out and became a reservist for another 7 years. And then I shipped out on an oceanographic ship for a year. And then from there, I went to a drill ship, the world's first dynamically positioned deepwater drill ship, the Discover 7 Seas. And then from that to mostly offshore oil field support stuff, ocean-going tugs, transoceanic tows, cargo ships, seismic vessels, supply boats, and then into harbor and coastwise towing, and then eventually a passenger ship, one little deviation there, and then what they call ATBs, or articulated tug barge units, where the tug is semi-permanently attached to the stern of the barge with giant hydraulic fins, driving around like a ship, and that's what I'm on right now.
Goodness me. So you said you were on one of the first deep drilling vessels?
The first dynamically positioned drill ship, that's right.
What is that exactly? Dynamically positioned?
It's dynamically positioned is a ship that holds itself in position with thrusters and nowadays azipods, but at that point in time it was forward turning screws, and we had 6 thrusters, but we could hold ourselves in position over the wellhead dynamically without any anchors or any cables attached to the sea floor or anything like that, which enabled drilling in very deep water. So the setup that we had at the time, of course, it's much more miniaturized today. This was 40 years ago.
I was going to ask, was this before or after the movie Armageddon?
Oh, decades before. Decades before, yeah.
The professional drillers.
Like 1983 or 4, something like that. Okay. And yeah, we had like an array of transponders that we'd set on the sea floor, and then we had hydrophones in the bottom of the ship's hull. And then the transponders would send a signal every few microseconds, and the hydrophones would receive that and measure the time distance. And from that, you could determine where you were in position over the top of the wellhead. We had a gigantic computer, a Honeywell computer, that was in an air-conditioned room underneath the flight deck back on the stern. And it was just learn as you go, because nobody had ever done this before, you know. So we had some Royal Navy guys that were sharp with computers, and they operated the DP system. And basically, we could stay within like 2 meters of the wellhead in 1.5 miles of water with that. And today, of course, the whole system is much more miniaturized. You know, the whole computing power can be put in a laptop. But, you know, it was a gigantic computer that was like 8 feet high and maybe 10 feet across and 10 feet deep, you know.
Took up a whole deck.
Yeah, it did. It took up the whole deck underneath the helideck on the ship. But it was cool. We were drilling natural gas wells, and every time we drilled a well, we'd set another world's record for water depth. We set like 7 world records in a row.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it was a cool ship. It was the company was Sonat Offshore Drilling, and the ship was named Discover Seven Seas, and she went on to set all sorts of records all over the world. Ship had been built in Japan. And when I was on it, she was fairly new, just a few years old. And we had a multinational crew, Dutch captain, English chief mate, Filipino chief engineer. It was like the United Nations. There was people from all over the world who were part of the crew, 135-man crew. We worked 28 days on, 28 days off. Yeah, it was cool.
So how is it that you know Jen Saletti, the shipwrecked scuba diver?
Well, I'm a diver also, and I have been my whole life, and also a shipwreck person. And Jen and myself and a group of friends and her late significant other, Joe Masrani, who passed away back in July.
I know, yeah.
Was a very, very close friend of mine and one of my best friends. I was there when that happened. Yeah, we've been collaborating on shipwreck and maritime research projects for decades.
So of all the vessels that you've been on, how many titles or roles have you held, essentially?
I've been everything from able seaman or seaman apprentice, really, when I started out in the Coast Guard, all the way to captain. I haven't sailed as an engineer, but I've sailed in every position in the deck department, apprentice seaman, bosun, third mate, second mate, chief mate, master. I didn't go to an academy. I just came up through the ranks.
You've just been working your way up. You didn't go to an academy, you said. You didn't do that. Oh, okay. So just learning on the job.
Yes.
And so you said you started in 78.
Correct.
Was there a moment? So how old would you have been in 78 when you started?
I was 18.
You was 18. And what was your first job?
My first job, well, I went to boot camp in Cape May, New Jersey for the Coast Guard. And then from there, I went to bosun mate port security school in Yorktown, Virginia. It was a 3-month school, basically a seamanship school and also marine inspection, because the Coast Guard is responsible for surveying cargo ships in the United States for compliance with U.S. regulations. So I learned about that. And then from there, I went to the cutter Courageous for 2 years, which was a medium endurance cutter that was based out of Port Canaveral, Florida. And we did search and rescue work and maritime interdiction work, basically narcotics interdiction and weapons smuggling interdiction in the Caribbean Sea and the Bahamas. And then from there, I went to Station Provincetown on the tip of Cape Cod, which was a search and rescue station. I was a motor lifeboat coxswain there. While I was there, actually, I went to the National Motor Lifeboat School at Cape Disappointment, Washington, at the mouth of the Columbia River Bar. It's the worst bar in the world. And
why is that?
It's the only bar that the surf breaks as high as the channel's dredged deep. The current runs out of the Columbia River at not uncommon 7 or 8 knots. I came down that river one time in clutch doing 13 knots. It screams out, and when it meets that westerly swell, it breaks. It looks like a surf break, And in the wintertime, it's not uncommon to have 50 feet of break and surf on the bar. And the Coast Guard will actually close the bar to traffic. A lot of those western-facing, Washington State and Oregon bars get closed by the Coast Guard when it gets just too rough to get a ship or a vessel across it. But yeah, it's for a young guy, I was like 21 years old or something like that, to go there. It was the greatest fun in the world. It's a 3-week class, and you graduate with essentially a PhD in extreme boat handling, and you become a surfman, or what they call a surfman. And yeah, it's just, you're operating these self-righting, self-bailing motor lifeboats. They were steel 44-footers at the time. They have a newer boat that's aluminum now. But the boat would self-right and self-bail, and you're operating the boat in extreme conditions. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, and certainly excellent training.
Who needs a roller coaster when you've got self-righting, self-bailing vessels?
Right, yeah. Every day is different.
Like Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
You call this a storm? Oh, you son of a bitch! You'll never sink this boat!
So you've done so much, it's kind of hard to sort of know where to start with the line of questioning. The Drillship intrigues me. When you were setting all of these records, because you were the first ship of its kind to do all of that sort of stuff, were you and the rest of the crew, did you feel like this was history? Or were you just working through the motions? It was nothing special, or did it feel special?
I think it was a combination of both. Everybody was gung-ho, out there. We were on charter to Shell Oil. We're working for Shell. And so everybody was gung-ho and, to drill deeper water and drill a deeper hole in the ground. And at that time we were doing this, the technology wasn't there to get the natural gas out of the wells, because we were beyond the depth where production was possible at that point. So what we were doing was just drilling these wells and capping them. And, with the thought that, or Shell's thought anyway, that, the technology will eventually be there and we'll come back and tap into them and then, do production.
But it's like that kind of, like canary down the mine. You're not sure how far you're supposed to go. So you're capping it every, you go a centimeter, you cap it, you're like, okay, well, how does that work? You're very trepidatious.
We drill until we hit natural gas,
Right.
And then say, all right, we got a gas pocket, we cap this one. And then we'd move on and find another gas pocket and drill into that and then cap that one. And we were doing it in, in 1.25 miles to 1.5 miles of water. And so every time we drilled a well, we were working our way offshore, and we're about 140 miles off of Delaware. And so we were in, increasingly deeper water. And we were just, a bunch of young guys that we're cowboys,
gassing up.
just doing it. We kind of knew we thought we were badasses, and in reality we were, because nobody else in the world could touch us. And that company actually became Transocean Offshore, and they're still that way. They're still like light years ahead of anybody else on the planet when it comes to deepwater drilling. Today it's called Transocean Offshore. It's morphed many times over, but yeah, I mean, there was a dry ship until crew change day. Once we get ashore, then we were all hard drinkers. Couple funny stories. People lived all over the world. And this is back in the days before electronic ticketing and all, cell phones and all that stuff, So we had an agent ashore that took care of us, and they would arrange all the flights. and we were choppering back and forth to the rig by helicopter. So crew change day, they would swap half the crew, and then 2 weeks later, the other crew would swap. So it was kind of staggered. So it wasn't 135 of us on every crew change. It was like half, like 65 or 70, something like that. So we'd chopper into Cape May, New Jersey at the Cape May County Airport. They had like a big bus there that would take us to the Philadelphia airport and everybody fly home. So there was a liquor store right outside the gate at the Cape May County Airport. And we make the driver stop, and we go in and get like a half a dozen cases of beer and a case of scotch. We had a bunch of guys from Scotland and English guys that loved the scotch. So we'd start drinking. And one time the bathroom on a bus broke. So we made the driver pull over on the side of the freeway right before Philadelphia. There's 60 guys standing on the side of the road taking a piss. And we get to the airport, and the girls behind the ticketing counter, because, you know, in those days you had to go up to the counter, get your ticket, you know, they'd all cringe when they see it. It's like, oh, it's another Sonat crew change. It's those guys again. And
we were a handful.
Yeah, we're all out of control, you know. So we go up to the ticket counter, and they would assign the seats then, because they learned their lesson. Like if three of us were on the same plane, they would never see, like, one guy would be up in the front, one guy would be in the very last row, and one guy be in the middle. You know, they would never let us sit together because they knew that was trouble.
Well, you live and learn.
Yeah. So one time we had the tool pusher was the guy that runs a drill floor. His name was Ross Eade, good guy. But he lived in Bangkok. He had a whorehouse in Bangkok and a mama san that ran a place when he was away, and an apartment upstairs that he'd live in when he got back. So this guy Dell, who was the ship's welder, he was an English guy. Dell and Ross end up on the same BOAC plane that's going to, first it's going to Heathrow, and the next stop is Bangkok, right? So it's a 747, the plane takes off, both guys are shit-faced. So Dell's sitting in the middle row, and he flips up the planes didn't have that many people on, flips up all the armrests, lays down, falls asleep. You know, they're getting close to Heathrow, you know, they come on a loudspeaker, everybody sit up, you know, put your seatbelt on. Dell doesn't listen to any of that. He's passed out on the seat. The plane lands. He rolls off of the seat and rolls up underneath the next set of seats. And he's still passed out there. The plane, you know, people get off at Heathrow, some more people get on, plane taxis out, takes off again. So it takes off. Dell rolls out from underneath the seats. What the hell's going on? And he's on his way to Bangkok. So he said, all right, I'll hang out at Ross's place for a couple of weeks, then I'll go home. And he did.
Good old Dell. Most of your career at sea, is it fair to say, is in the tugboat sector?
Yes, yeah. Vast majority of my time, you know, close to 90%, I would say, has been on tugs.
Well, I got this little guy here.
I see that.
Yeah, there's a tugboat on my wallpaper, folks, if you're listening to this. And of course, I'm sat right in front of it, so you can't really see it. But it's tugging a big old shipping container. You must have, tugged quite a few things in your time.
I have.
Do you have a ballpark figure? Is that a rude question to ask a tugger?
Yeah. Well, I've towed all sorts of things, from drilling rigs to oil barges to a Dutch launch barge to basically you name it. Deck barges, container barges, all sorts of stuff. I've done ship assist work.
And what is the most important practical skill? Because you said you've come up through the ranks. You didn't go to an academy. What's like the most practical skill you've carried forward from your early days all the way up to now?
Well, from the very earliest days, I had the good fortune when I was in the Coast Guard on the very first ship that I ever sailed on, the Courageous. There was a warrant officer, Chief Warrant Officer Lang. It was a damage controlman. And he taught me, I went to a bunch of different firefighting schools, but he was the guy that really taught me shipboard damage control and firefighting. And those lessons that I learned from Chief Warrant Officer Lang back in the 70s, I've carried forward and passed on to my various crews over the past however many years it's been. So, you talk about the earliest of lessons. I would say those were the ones.
So like 5 decades ago, nearly.
Yes. Yeah, nearly 5 decades ago.
And you were doing what under his tutelage?
Because we were a search and rescue ship, so you never know what you were going to end up with.
Yeah.
You'd get called to go do something, you'd be out on patrol, you come up on a ship on fire or a vessel on fire, or something was sinking. We were involved in the Cuban exodus of 1980, which was when Castro allowed a lot of people to leave the country and come to the United States. And that happened from May through about October of 1980. We ended up being the referee for that down in the Straits of Florida. We were there. All sorts of small boats were leaving out of Mariel, Cuba, and going to Key West. About 100 miles roughly across the Straits of Florida there. Many of them in very poor condition. Some of them were sinking. So we were doing damage control every day to keep these boats afloat, rescue the people. It was sort of an all hands on deck, ongoing search and rescue situation from the beginning to the end there.
So this isn't something I know a lot about in the old history books, but Fidel Castro, famously not a very nice person, but that's right?
Well, it all depends upon the perspective.
Of like a lot of things, yeah.
Right, yeah.
But he's a communist, famously.
Yeah, he was communist.
But he was letting people flee or leave.
He was letting people leave the country, yeah. For a brief period of time, he let people leave.
And you were escorting, well, in a roundabout way, or patrolling, making sure that they weren't getting attacked or they weren't running aground.
Right. It was it's an open sea passage between Cuba and Florida, and it can be notoriously rough because the Gulf Stream comes up through there. And if you get any kind of an easterly wind, it will make the seas stand up and be very steep. So it's treacherous for small boats. And people were trying, it's mostly families. You'd see mom, dad, the grandparents, and all the kids, as groups together, sometimes multiple groups, overcrowded onto these relatively small boats trying to make the passage. So it was a difficult time for those people. And our job was basically to ensure their safety and the larger boats to keep them afloat, and the smaller boats, a lot of times we would just get the people off and bring them on board our ship and then tow everything up to Key West and drop it off and drop the people off and then go back out again.
And what was the process of, like, once they'd arrived in the States? Had they just been granted temporary visas or?
Yeah, I can't speak for that with authority because I'm not exactly sure, but I know Customs took over from there and dealt with it. Many of those people became U.S. citizens. They were just simply looking for a better way of life,
Yeah. But so what was it before because you said you started at sea when you were 18. What was it that predicated that your life would be at sea? Do you have like an early memory of like, this is what I want to do?
Yes, I was always fascinated by boats and ships. My mom was a ship model maker, and I grew up on the banks of the Hudson River. And so I grew up around the water. The town that I lived in, all the kids sort of played in the river. I had my first boat when I was 10 years old. And growing up, I worked in a boatyard from the time I was maybe 12 years old up through the time I graduated from high school. And all my local friends did the same thing. So we grew up with boats and around the water. And so I learned to sail when I was 6 years old. I could sail before I could ride a two-wheel bicycle. It was a natural thing for me.
Wow. And so you've never looked back, you never thought about doing anything other than boats. This is like, your calling was set in stone or set in motion pretty early.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. And the core bulk of your experience being the tugboats. Or is it tug or is it tow? What is it preferred?
Tugboats, yeah.
Tugboats.
Tugboats are a slightly different type of tug that's used on the inland river system that actually, it's sort of confusing, but they're used to push barges up and down the inland river system. And they're called towboats.
But they push, they don't tow.
Right. Yeah.
That's where tugs are. Did they not want to be called? Did they not like the idea of being called push boats? They had a union. They were like, no.
I think it was just probably a slang. In the United States, we have a lot of slang for all different, and the maritime industry, of course, is full of it.
When you entered that phase of your life, what did you discover about the world that outsiders didn't know looking in? Like, what was it that kept? Because obviously this is something that you stuck with for the majority of your career. So there must have been something that you're like, oh wow, this is heavy, or this is something that I'm going to continue with.
Yeah, it
A
was
pull
for
factor.
me. I liked it because it was the boat handling and the ship handling aspect of it was a lot of fun, you know. And the first tug I worked on was a big anchor handling boat, the Band of Seahorse, 6,000 horsepower, a little over 200 feet long, and we did rig moves with it. So I was like a 24-year-old kid or I don't know, young,
Yeah.
you know. And I was like, man, this is, you know, a lot of people worked at equal time. And I just told the office, I'll stay for a while, you know. So I'd stay for like 2 weeks or, no, excuse me, 6 weeks. And then I go home for 2 and come back for 6. You know, everybody else was working equal time. I was single. I didn't care. It's like, this is great. I'm having a great time. We're doing cool stuff with big toys. And it was cool. It was a lot of fun. So I think a lot of people that, you know, could have joined the industry didn't really realize, you know, how much fun it could be.
It's kind of like, well, if you imagine being a captain on a big cruise ship, for example, you've got all
Yeah.
this weight, all this responsibility on your shoulders. All the passengers can see you up on the deck, you know, steering in your white uniform, looking all suave. But then it's cool on the surface. But then what happens if your ship breaks down? You got Eric out in front with his tugboat. He doesn't need a white uniform, but he's got a little dinky little boat, and he's
Hmm.
pulling your ass out of bother because he's got the gear. So
Right.
it's like I guess it's kind of a massive ego boost. It's quite like, yeah, I don't need a big ship to look good, mate. You fucking,
Right.
I'll crack on.
Yeah.
But that's something that you've done from the early ages of like 24, you said?
Yeah, I always enjoyed the boat handling and the ship handling, and I still do. You know, I still do. Over the years, I've taught it to a lot of people, and it's one of the things that probably in my career that I find most satisfying, if I have to say, and that is the people that I've taught that have come up, you know, behind me. I have quite a few people that were crew members of mine that came on as apprentice seamen or as brand new people and then have worked their way up and are now captains or harbor pilots. And that gives me just tremendous satisfaction to see those people succeed and further their careers.
And if there's something you could impart knowledge-wise about your expertise in tugging, what would that be?
The most important thing is to do the right thing and do things on your own terms, not to let a dispatcher or an office person pressure you into something that you shouldn't do.
Because it's ultimately your call. You're in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and your life and your
Okay.
crew's life, you know. I mean, that even in today's world, that struggle still goes on.
Mm.
And I still have that struggle at work. You know, I'm a guy that's been around a long time, but I still have to fight with the office not to do stupid stuff. A lot of times we're asked to load cargoes that we shouldn't load or are outside the limits of our safety management system. And the second mate gets upset about it. And I tell him, don't worry, just refer to call to me. I'll take care of it. We're not doing stupid stuff. I'm just not going to allow it. And I try to encourage that to anybody else that's coming up. You have a right to have a stop work authority. And if you see something that's not right, raise your hand.
Well, you must have good reason for these practices to be in place. Have you had some scares in the past, in the years you were
Oh,
working?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of horrible stuff. You know, people have been killed, people have been seriously injured, all sorts of things have happened. And you just, you know, it's not worth it. It's not, you know, accidents will happen and you need to be prepared and drill and you know, have good training so you're prepared in case things do happen, which they eventually will. But at the same token, you can go a long way to minimize risk by being careful, following your safety management systems and your protocols for whether it's handling cargo, whether it's making tow, letting go, mooring operations, crane operations, whatever it is, just follow that. Follow your safety management system is your friend, I tell people.
And what's the heaviest thing you've towed?
Uh, well, I towed a 75,000 ton Dutch launch barge called a Harema 114 one time. And I've towed some big drilling rigs, Zapata Yorktown, and some other big semi submersible drilling rigs. Yeah, so different stuff, you know.
A drilling rig is, in comparison to, say, like a cruise ship, how many tons are we talking?
Well, it depends upon the rig, and also depends upon the cruise ships. Cruise ships can be
Yeah,
anywhere from very small to very large, from a
up to
couple hundred
200,
tons
up to
to
200,000
200.
tons. Okay.
Right. And drilling rigs can be anywhere from like 50 to 150, 175,000 tons, 200,000 tons.
Is there
The
any
ones,
vessel that tops 200,000 tons?
no, I haven't towed anything that big.
Because
The biggest I've towed
the
was,
biggest cruise ships are the ones that are the biggest vessels out on the sea, right?
well, probably no. The biggest ships out on the sea would be ultra large cruise carriers, which are
Oh yes, of course.
much bigger than cruise ships. Uh,
Mm.
but they're in the 300 plus range.
So what happens if they break down?
Well, they break that, then you need a salvage tug to come and get them,
Yeah.
and there are big tugs around that'll do that type of thing.
Have you done those? Not yet.
I have not. I haven't towed an ultra large crude carrier. I have towed broken down ships, but I have not towed a tanker that big.
Oh, okay. Is that something that you feel comfortable doing, or is it outside?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the vessel that I'm on now is not that type of tug, but if I were to be on that type of tug, I have done it in the past. So sure. Yeah. Dead ship tows and do it again.
Is towing, would you say, more of an art, or is it more muscle memory?
It's both actually. There's muscle memory in the ship handling that you develop over time, and that just comes with repeated practice and getting a feel for your individual vessel, how that vessel responds and reacts to different rudder and engine commands under different conditions. And also there's an art. There's absolutely an art to it. There's an art to ship handling, art to boat handling that comes with time and practice. Some people are really good at it. Some people will never be good at it. It's not something that everybody can do. Some people are gifted and have the ability. The thing with ship handling is you have to be able to think ahead several steps and to be able to anticipate what's going to happen and have a feel for the vessel and how it's going to react in the wind, in the current, and if you're maneuvering in the open sea to make tow on a disabled ship, then you have to understand how the disabled ship is drifting and how your own vessel is going to react, and to be able to get up underneath the bow and pass the tow, and also keep your guys safe on deck, so you're not washing guys overboard. Usually when this kind of thing happens, the weather's not great, and you may have a situation where you get out there and you get alongside a casualty and the weather's not good enough for making up, and you might have to wait. You might have to jog a day or so until the weather lays down enough to be able to get a wire across to them.
When you say jog, what do you don't mean literally jog?
No, it's just that's a seagoing term where you're just sort of idling up into the weather and just sort of stemming it with the bow into the seas and just sort of easing along and just sort of maintaining station while you're waiting for the weather to calm down.
Yeah, I think it's important whenever we hit these little nautical slang terms that we address it, because not everyone that listens to this knows anything about ships and jargon. And if I know as much as I know, I still don't know everything.
Sure.
So
None of us do.
none of us do. What's the time you felt the most responsibility under the weight of being captain?
Well, is different situations in different times. Been a number of them over the years, of course, but I'll give you just one recent one. The vessel that I'm on right now is an ATB. The name is the Chincoteague. She was built in 2018. She's one of three sisters. They were all named after barrier islands on the east coast of Virginia and Maryland. So shortly after the boat came out of the shipyard, I got on her in July of 2018 before she was delivered from the yard. And we brought her out of the shipyard in September, first week in September 2018. And initially, we were on charter to Delta Airlines, loading jet fuel in New Orleans and taking it to Tampa. And on one of those trips, we were coming back from Tampa, going back to the Mississippi River, and it's not terribly far. It's only like a little over 300 miles, 350 miles roughly from the Tampa Sea Buoy to the Southwest Pass Sea Buoy. And the weather came up, it was in the wintertime, and the weather came up much stronger than had been anticipated and forecast. It was blowing about 60 miles an hour or so out of the south, And the chief mate woke me up. We're at the time we're standing 6 hours on, 6 hours off watch. And in the afternoon, he woke me up in the middle of the afternoon, said, he said, Cap, you should ought to come up and take a look. And we were rolling pretty good. The wind was on the beam. So I came up, and it was rough. And he said, we just took one wave, green wave, went right over the top of the vacuum tank. And so the vessel has 19 feet of freeboard, about 6 meters of freeboard roughly amidships. And the vacuum tank is on deck amidships, and it's about 8 feet high. So it was probably a 30-foot wave that went over the top of the vacuum tank.
Wow.
And so pretty good sized swell, you know. And the thing about the Gulf of Mexico is they're always very close together. So we're taking a beating, you know. And I said, all right, you know, I'll hang out with you. And we didn't have that terribly far to go to get to the river. So come about 17:30, Cameron went off watch and went down below. He says, you want me to stay up? I said, no, I'll get some rest. I said, you know, we got to get rest when we can. So we're approaching the Southwest Pass sea buoy about 2000 or so, which is about 8 o'clock at night. And there was 2 other ships in front of me, and everybody's lining up to go in the pass, and the pilot boats come outside and board the ships outside. As a U.S. flagship, we deal with the federal pilots, and then the foreign flagships use the state pilots. And I've been in and out of Southwest Pass literally hundreds of times, and I always tell the pilot boat, I'll meet you inside. You know, there's 2 sets of ranges when you're coming in. There's the A ranges and the B ranges, which are lights that you line up on when they're in line. You know you're in line for the channel. So you come in on the A ranges, you make the swing for the B ranges, and then you come up, and then you're in the jetties, and then you come right again and go up the pass. So I called him that evening and said, I'll meet you at the pilot station. It's really rough out here. Don't come outside. So there's the 2 ships are ahead of me, and both of them are bulk carriers. And the guy that's directly ahead of me is slowing down. And the wind is like dead astern. It's 60 knots on my stern. And this guy's a light bulk carrier, so slowing down is not a good idea because the ship is high out of the water. He's got, you know, his propellers close to the surface, part of his rudder's out of the water. He's going to lose maneuverability if he slows down. He needs to keep the ship moving. But he's starting to lose his nerve as he's approaching the pass. So the guy starts to fall off, and I'm calling him on the radio. He won't answer.
When you say fall off,
his heading is starting to fall to one side.
Right.
So instead of maintaining his heading, is starting to fall to one side.
Yeah.
So he's starting to get broadside. And there's a pilot boat coming out to board the first of these 2 ships. And the pilot boat came alongside the first guy. And all this is sort of happening simultaneously. And the pilot's having a tough time trying to make it on the ladder because there's big swells that are rolling past the ship. And I could here I'm thinking, oh, please don't fall off that ladder, you know, because if he does, the current's going to carry him out, and good chance going to get run over by either the ship in front of me, the pilot boat, or me. Yeah. And the guy, he can't get on the ladder. He gets back on the radio on the pilot boat, and he's calling. He's out of breath, and he's telling the ship, I can't get aboard. We're going to have to go in and get a different pilot and come out and try again.
So this is just a good moment to say, if people are not sure why you've got a pilot coming aboard, pilots are the people that know the area like the back of their hand. They're
correct. Yeah, they're familiar with the waters, and they're required for foreign ships entering ports. Like any ship enters any country's port that's not from that country, they're required to take a pilot. Yeah. So both of these ships were foreign flag. They're required to take pilots. And then in the case of U.S. flags in U.S. waters, it varies on tonnage requirements. If the vessel's under 10,000 tons, they're not required to take a pilot. If it's over 10,000, they are required. But some companies require pilotage anyway, based on the safety management system.
Yeah.
So the pilot boat runs in to get another pilot, and he's coming out. And meantime, the ship that was behind him, between the two of us, has fallen broadside to the current and the wind, and he's rolling, and he wouldn't answer the radio. So I said, I'm going around him. So I just hooked it up, and I turned to starboard and sort of went around his stern and come up in line behind the first ship. And the pilot at this time, the second pilot, got on that ship and was able to board it. So he got on, and they proceeded into the river. My second mate was up on a bridge with me, and he's white knuckling it. He's got a death grip on the console on the port side, and so we're surfing in, and I get up. The river's running out at like 6 or 7 knots, and you got 60 knots of wind behind it, so it's like Hawaii 5-0 surf coming in the entrance there, Yeah. And so the Chincoteague handles beautifully. She's like a Ferrari, and big rudders, loads of leverage, and she drives beautifully. It's a lot of fun to drive. So we came right in the pass without any problem. And second mate's over there with a death grip, and he's like, "Oh, good job, Cap." I'm like, "No problem, Dan. I've been in this place a million times." But yeah, it was just, I was just very glad that the first pilot did not fall off the ladder, because that would have been bad. I lost a friend a number of years ago at the entrance to Delaware Bay. He fell off a ladder. He got halfway up in January, halfway up the pilot ladder, fell off, and ended up going underneath the pilot boat, got hit by the propeller, and it killed him.
That's an occupational hazard that no one really talks about. I mean, there's probably not that many people that actually know that pilots exist in that capacity, and then that's a big risk that they have to take every single time that they are boarding every single time. It's not like anything else, and you're basically doing that whilst the ships are kind of on different wave breaks, and so you're trying to jump as. Have you ever done piloting?
Ship docking in New York Harbor years ago, a little bit, but not, sea piloting or anything like that.
You wouldn't want to give that a go?
No, I was asked to many years ago, and I thought about it because it's fun work, but I just like going places. So, if I committed to being a pilot in one place, which would have been New York Harbor, as great as that would be, I wouldn't be going places anymore, and I just like going different places.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, that incident was a white knuckle, as you said, and there are risks involved being a pilot, but across is it 40 odd years, 50 years? How many years are we saying that your career has spanned?
What is it? 47?
47, that was it. Yes.
Yeah.
Of the 47 years, is there a scariest 60 seconds? I hate to ask you that question.
Yeah. Well, a couple.
I knew there would be more than a couple. How do you quantify the scariest? It's difficult.
Yeah. The two scariest, equally scary. The first was when I was working for Seahorse, and I was on the band of Seahorse, and we were on charter to Exxon, and we were alongside a drill ship called the Glomar Pacific, which was working south of Louisiana, sort of a place called west of the pass, and she blew out while we were alongside. And I don't know if you ever saw that movie Deepwater Horizon. That was a semi-submersible drilling rig that blew out in the Gulf of Mexico back in.
Who was in that? Was that
2008?
Was that Josh Brolin?
Mark Wahlberg, I think.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It was a semi-submersible drilling rig that blew out in the Gulf of Mexico. They had a massive fire, and then the rig sank. 11 people were killed. There was a massive oil spill. It took them several months to plug the well. And that was back in 2009, I think. So I was alongside the Glomar Pacific when they blew out. And it got your undivided attention pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
And gas, oil, mud, everything else coming up through the moon pool in the center of the ship and blowing out everywhere. Fortunately, she didn't ignite, and they were able to get the well sealed. If they hadn't, then it would have been a big problem. There would have been a massive fire and certainly loss of life. But we were just lucky. We got the ship fired up. We were alongside. I think we were pumping them mud at the time, and that's another slang for drilling fluids. And we got fired up and released the lines and got away from them as quickly as possible. So that was probably the first real scary one that I had as a merchant mariner. And the second one was in New York Harbor. I was working on a boat called the John Turacamo, which was a tugboat that did barge towing and ship assist work within the harbor. She was a narrow tug with a round bottom that had what they call rolling chocks on the bottom of the hull, which were like fins that ran lengthwise on the bottom of the hull to help reduce the rolling of the boat. They helped a little bit when the tug was at sea, but when working in the harbor alongside ships, it would make the tug have a tendency to sort of climb up the side of the ship and then roll outboard, which was dangerous when doing ship assist work. So we were assigned to sail a tanker at a bayway terminal on the backside of Staten Island. It was a large tanker, and tankers in the quays there behind Staten Island, most of the time, if they're big enough, you can't turn them around, so you have to just proceed out to sea in the direction the ship's facing. So this particular ship was facing south, so we had to go south and go down through the quays, and we had 2 tugs on the job, us and the Jennifer, and one of our docking pilots was on board. We sailed the ship and we proceeded down through the quays, and we're going to go around the bottom of Staten Island. And before we got to the very bottom of Staten Island, our docking pilot got off on the second tug. He got on the Jennifer and got off. So we were made up on the starboard bow of the ship with a ship line up, which is a 10-inch polyester Dacron line up just on a chock and bit just after the ship's bow on the starboard side. And there was what we call a hook pilot. Sandy Hook pilot was on board, and he would be the guy that would take the ship the rest of the way out around the south side of Staten Island and out to sea. So our pilot got off, and I should have at that time called the ship and say, hey, do you want us to leave too? But I didn't. Mistake on my part. The hook pilot was now responsible for us. So we were coming down a point called Ward Point Bend, and the ship was empty. And as he started into the turn, which is a fairly sharp turn, the ship was moving, and the tug started to climb up the side of the ship, so she's rolling outboard. And I called the guy, the pilot, and I said, hey, don't forget about us. I'm still here. And he goes, oh, we forgot about you. So I'm like, oh, shit. So he's into the turn. He's starting in the turn. And as he does that, the tug is rolling over. So the only thing I could do was go full astern. So I'm standing on the port side of the pilot house, and I went all stop with both engines, and I went full astern on both. And there were these Mathers air controls, and I'm holding on to the controls, and I'm full astern, and the tug is rolling. She goes all the way over on her side, and I'm hanging onto the controls. I'm dangling in the air in the pilot house. The tug's on its side.
Correct.
And the line breaks. It snaps, and we slide down the side of the ship. The ship is going over the top of us, and I'm just praying that we don't hit the ship's propeller. And we slid down the side, and then eventually we slid off of his stern and then righted ourselves. How we didn't ended up sinking, I'll never know, because this particular tug had doors all the way down both sides of the deck house. Fortunately, the starboard doors were closed. If they weren't, I wouldn't be here talking to you. And the engineer, Joey Leberton, was standing on a bow. And I was, I'm wondering, because I had 2 guys out on deck. The engineer and the deckhand were out on deck. And I don't know where they are. I figured they went underneath the ship, And then we pop upright, and I hear Joey yelling. And he goes, don't put him in gear, don't put him in gear. And I look out the window, and he goes, the hawser's overboard. We had 1,800 feet of towing hawser, 1,800 feet of 10-inch hawser coiled up on the stern. And when I backed full, that went over. And of course, when the tug went over on her side, that whole mess went overboard, and it went in both wheels. And the wheels are the propellers.
Right, yeah.
It stalled both engines. I didn't realize this. It's silent now. Everything is shut down, and everybody's in shock. Joey's there, thank God. The deckhand was hanging on a rail, and he ended up in the water, but he had a hold of a handrail on the side of the tug and didn't get washed away and survived. And we're floating upright, and it took me a second to realize the engines weren't running, So we sort of took stock of everybody, and called the office, and another tug came and got us and towed us over to a shipyard that was close by. And some divers came and cut the hawser out of the propeller, or out of both propellers, because she was twin screw tug. But yeah, oil from the bilge went all the way up the side of the bulkheads in the engine room on the starboard side and up to the fiddly bulkheads. It was a close shave.
Yeah,
To this day, I can't really explain why I'm still here.
That's the hands down closest shave you've had.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, well,
I've had a couple others that are really close, but that was probably the closest.
we'll count your lucky stars, Eric.
Yeah.
Who is Jenny Maitland?
Jenny Maitland was a tug in New York Harbor.
For the listeners only, there's a placard behind Eric on his wall. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah. That was it was a wooden name board that was laying on the ground in the shipyard. And there was a forklift driving over it one day, and the towing company that I was working for used to tie up in that yard. And I just picked it up and threw it in the back of my truck and brought it home. I figured they were just using it as a staging plank, and it was an actual name board from an old tugboat. So I brought it home.
You never worked on it.
No, I never worked on that particular tug.
You stole another man's woman.
Mm.
But it was being disgraced by the forklift driver.
Exactly. It was being disgraced. It was just laying there in the yard, and they were driving over it with a forklift.
Well, you're a hero, if anything. You were inside the industry during the standardization and implementation of the ISM, which is the Safety Rules and Regulation, right, in the US, tug and barge sector.
ISM was an international convention that the United States is, and pretty much all seafaring nations are signatory to. It's promulgated by the International Maritime Organization, whose headquarters are in London. Right. And it became mandatory for ships in, I believe it was 1996. The company that I was working for at the time, Maritrans, we had just recently purchased 4 tankers, 2 from Sun Oil and 2 from Chevron. So we had to implement a safety management system to cover those 4 ships. And at the time, I was on the corporate safety committee, and we just made the decision that we would do it also for tugs and barges. Since we had a large fleet of tugs and barges and we're going to draft a system anyway, we might just as well as draft it for the tugs and barges. So we did. And that was the start of it. But yes, it's something that's worldwide. And it was initiated by the IMO after the Herald of Free Enterprise disaster, which was a Townsend Car Ferries ferry that capsized on a voyage from Zeebrugge, Belgium to Dover. And she was designed to load automobiles and cars and be able to accelerate quickly when she left port and make several round trips across the English Channel every day, which she did. And at the time of that disaster, it was the assistant bosun's job to secure the bow door on the car ferry. And with car ferries or vehicle carriers, usually they have very long decks that are unsubdivided. They're just long open decks that cars or trucks will load onto, and then some ships have a door at each end, some ships have them only on one end. It all depends upon the vessel. On this particular ferry, the Herald of Free Enterprise, there was doors on each end. And on the fateful day, the ship left port, and the people on the bridge didn't know that the bow door was not closed. The assistant bosun hadn't closed it, and they accelerated quickly. And when they did that, the bow of the ship dipped down, and it's basically scooped up a load of water onto the car deck, which caused free surface effect, and the ship lost stability and capsized right outside of Zeebrugge, Belgium. And there was a very large loss of life on that. And after that disaster, the International Maritime Organization got together and said, all right, enough's enough. There's been so many accidents over the years that could have been avoided had protocols been developed and then followed. So they implemented the ISM code. And basically, the ISM code in a nutshell is the IMO had no intention of telling ship owners or operators how to operate their ships. What they said was, you folks come up with policies and procedures, how you're going to run your company and how you're going to operate your ships, and then do it the way you say you're going to do it. And that's That's it. And is, in a nutshell, ISM is like you define what your protocols and then you operate by your protocols. And what gives it legitimacy is a third party audit. So that was the other key piece of ISM was safety people at the company and the management sit down and develop your safety management system, get it all drafted up. It'll be audited initially by a third party and then audited annually, both at the corporate level and at the vessel level. It gets audited annually by an independent third party who has no vested interest. At Maritrans, when we did that, we used Lloyd's of London for our third party auditor. And as that has rolled out over the decades since, there's a number of different third-party auditors that do that type of auditing today, for whether it's Norse Veritas, whether it's American Bureau of Shipping, Coast Guard will do it. So, yeah.
I know. And so with all of that, is there like a most dangerous false belief that you have seen mariners operating under? It's difficult to know, I guess. Well, you're drawing up these safety procedures and plans where you draw the lines or what way you can intervene, because a lot of people operate with instinct and they're driven by their guidelines as much as anything. But you've got to kind of draw a line through all of that and be like, no, this is my way or the highway.
Sort of, yeah. But that said, it's every company has the ability to draft their own safety management system. And safety management systems I like to refer to them as a living, breathing document. It's something that's evolving all the time. As trading patterns change, as technology evolves, as material science evolves, as ship construction and fleet makeup evolves, safety management systems are designed so you can evolve them with the changes. For example, at Maritrans, when we drew up the first one, we said, all right, this is our first go at it. And it was mostly in large 3-ring binders. We ran it around the block, literally, for a year. We rolled it out to the fleet. All the ships used it. The tugs and barges used it. After a year, we came back and we took feedback from the operators, from office personnel, because there's also a shoreside segment to it as well. And what works, what doesn't work. And then we implemented changes, which you can do with a safety management system. And you record a record of changes in the different segments of your safety management system. I sometimes when I'm explaining it to people, I'll refer to it as like a wagon wheel, with a hub being your corporate policies and procedures, and each different spoke of the wheel might be shipboard operations, barge operations, tug operations, maintenance, HSE. So, there's all different spokes of it and different aspects. But it is a living, breathing thing, and input can be taken from the fleet. Smart companies will do that. They'll take input from the fleet and refine it, because the idea is you want people to use it. You want people to be on board with it. So there has to be buy-in from the fleet and from shoreside support as well. But there has to be, collective buy-in from everybody. And in order to do that, you're going to have something that makes sense. So for the most part, they do. And they're, like I say, they're continually crafted and updated. And then it is audited from the outside, which gives it legitimacy. And so it makes it thorough. Makes it thorough, yeah.
What's one invisible skill that a great tug captain has that can't be taught in a classroom?
Ship handling.
It's just
instinct. The boat handling just is something you can't teach that. And you can do a little bit in a simulator, but not really. There's nothing like standing there at the console with your hand on a wheel and the throttles and handling a vessel. That just comes from repetition. It's the same thing with pilots, because tug operators essentially have to be pilots. And it just takes many, many dockings and sailings and maneuvers over time to become proficient at that. And that's a skill that you can only learn by hands-on.
But they have, you said simulators. They have like
a ship simulator. They have full mission bridge simulators where you can go and do these simulation exercises for all different types of scenarios with different types of ships and tugs and barges.
I bet the tech behind those has gotten a lot more, has increased quite a bit over the years. Like all simulators.
Yeah.
Are they operating on like a fake wave pool or what?
They actually can. On the big ones, they do that. You're standing on a flat level surface that actually doesn't move, but the way the screens are, you can make it feel like you're actually the vessel's moving and rolling and pitching and everything else. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean, years ago, this is a long time. I went doing survival at sea kind of techniques and things like, righting an upturned life raft and,
Hmm.
jumping off of the side of a ship, how you hold your life jacket and all of these things.
Yeah.
And to simulate that we were going through a storm, we were told that this facility that we were heading to, they had a wave pool, they had like, big industrial blowing, fans, and they had strobe lighting and all of this stuff. But when we got there, the reality was they didn't have any of those things. There was somebody in the pool that was splashing us. There was somebody who pressed play on a tape player that literally played a storm track. And then another guy who was just flicking the light switch on and off. But you know what? It worked.
Oh man.
Not quite the same as the real thing.
No.
So, is there any particularly funny stories that come to mind?
Well, of course, there's a few, but this is a good one that came up recently. So many years ago, I was a mate on this tug in New York Harbor called the Elizabeth Turacamo, and the captain was a guy that was an exercise nut. And he was always doing calisthenics, and he had a 10-speed bicycle that he would ride if we were tied up someplace. And so one day he gets this contraption where you could set the rear wheel of the bicycle on top of this contraption and then pedal like you're actually riding your bike. So it's in the afternoon. He drags the whole mess up into the pilot house. And I'm driving across New York Harbor, and he sets the thing up, and he's got it athwartships facing to port in the pilot house. I'm driving a boat, and he's pedaling like a madman. He's got it in high gear, and he's huffing and puffing and pedaling. And we go over the wake of a Staten Island ferry, and he's up to like full speed on a bicycle.
I know where this is going.
The back wheel jumps off at a contraption, and the rubber met the road,
Yeah.
And that back wheel hit the deck, and there was no stopping him.
That'll learn you.
Crashes into the port bulkhead like the windowsill. Falls off. And I'm laughing my ass off. He gets up and he's screaming. He's mad as he's red in the face. His veins are sticking out. He's yelling at me like it's my fault, you know? And the louder he yells, the harder I'm laughing. I got tears coming out of my eyes. I'm losing control of the boat. I had to stop. It's like, oh my God, I'm laughing. And he just, I won't mention his name because he's still working.
And he probably knows who he is if he hears.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think most of us know people like that, but to take your fanaticism for fitness to the extreme of whilst you're, on a pilot boat, or what was it, a pilot or a tug?
It was on a tugboat, yeah. It was
yeah.
And he was the captain, I was the mate, and I'd driven it over the wake of the Staten Island ferry, and that was the end of that.
Aside from all of your endeavors at sea, you're also now an author. You've written a book that's just been published, or is about to come out?
Actually, it's my second book.
Right, yes.
But I've been a passionate reader my entire life. I've always collected books since I was a little kid. And my latest book that my co-author Randall Peffer and I have written is this one, Yarmouth Castle Burning. And it's about the SS Yarmouth Castle disaster in November of 1965. The ship was a former U.S. flag passenger ship that had been outflagged Panamanian. and was one of several ships that were involved in the burgeoning cruise ship industry in South Florida. And she had been sold a few times and was in pretty decrepit state, originally built in 1927. And she departed on a voyage from Miami to Nassau, a regular run, and caught fire about halfway through the voyage in the middle of the night, burned and sank with a loss of 90 lives. It was a terrible situation. Remarkably, over 460 people were rescued by two ships, the Bahama Star, another foreign flag passenger ship with an American captain, and a Finnish motor ship freighter called the Finpulp. Those two ships did a remarkable job of rescuing all the survivors. So the book is about that story. We found it interesting from many different angles, and it's one of those things where that old saying of 6 degrees of separation, where you don't really realize how close you are to something until you start digging into it. Initially, I started researching down at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Coast Guard held 19 days of hearings into the disaster after it had happened on behalf of the Panamanian government. The Panamanian government didn't have the capacity to conduct an investigation into the disaster, so they asked the U.S. Coast Guard to do so, and they did. And the National Archives held about 4,000 pages of documents from that investigation. So I had gone down there and scanned a massive pile of stuff and brought it home. And Randy and I started digging through it and putting the book together. And then in talking to some people, I had some friends in South Florida. My one friend, Bill Bunting, he's retired now, but was a tugboat captain in Miami Harbor. He worked with the gentleman that was the captain of the cruise ship, the Bahama Star cruise ship that rescued many of the passengers, and Louis Netherland and Carl Netherland Brown. So Bill was friends with him for many years and worked with him, so I was able to talk to him. And then my friend Jeff Macklin, who's I'm a member of the Steamship Historical Society of America, have been for many years. Jeff is a member also. In talking to Jeff, it turns out that he was also friends with Carl Brown and knew him very well. So there, you had that 6 degree of separation thing. And then Jeff, growing up, his parents' best friends were their next door neighbors, this couple called the Apuzos. They were on the ship when it happened.
Goodness me.
And ended up being survivors. And their three daughters were friends with Jeff growing up. And the three daughters are still alive. And Jeff facilitated us being able to meet the three daughters, the three Apuzzo daughters that their parents were on the ship, and also meet Louis Netherland, the son of Carl Netherland Brown, the captain. So it was cool. We were able to get firsthand accounts of, what these people remembered of their parents and what happened with the disaster. And then, digging further and further and further, we
found more connections,
other personal accounts and firsthand accounts from survivors.
But what was it that basically drew you to that project in the first place? Why was it that disaster that drew you to decide that's the book you're going to write? And why is the Yarmouth Castle burning disaster, why does it matter in 2025? Well, by the time this comes out, 2026.
Well, those are all great questions. My friend Randy and I, we have breakfast like once a week. We live just a few miles apart. Matter of fact, we had breakfast this morning. And we'd finished our last book, Dangerous Shallows. And I'm a shipwreck guy. I've been a wreck diver my whole life. And we're sort of casting around for ideas for the next book. We hit on the Yarmouth Castle disaster. And I already had a small file on it. And in looking around, we realized that nobody had ever written a book about the Yarmouth Castle. That books have been written about many other ship fires, such as the Morro Castle, which happened in the 1930s, the Prison Dam in the 80s up off of Alaska, the General Slocum, the Sultana. Many other ship fires have been written about, but nobody had ever written a book about the Yarmouth Castle. So we thought, well, geez, that was a major fire. There was a lot of things that happened as a result of that. The SOLAS regulations were changed. The SOLAS is a Safety of Life at Sea Convention.
If you're passing something in another vessel in distress, you have to help out, in a nutshell.
Correct, yes. And there's many aspects of SOLAS. It was first implemented after the Titanic disaster. disaster and has been updated numerous times since. But SOLAS regulations for passenger ships were changed after the Yarmouth Castle disaster, and U.S. regulations for passenger ships were changed as well. So it was a pivotal moment in the cruise ship industry, and it's still relevant today because of the changes in regulations and the changes in safety protocols. And in the back of the book, in the appendix section, we have 3 subsequent ship fires that are case studies. And one I call a miracle, one is a complete disaster that was very recent, and one an example of when everything goes right, when the crew does what they're supposed to do and follows protocol and there's a good outcome. So we feel it's a good read. It's got 5-star reviews on Amazon so far, and it was a labor of love for us to put it together. We were really excited about writing it, and it was a lot of fun to write, and it's an amazing story.
In doing the research for this book, was there a piece of testimony or an artifact that you uncovered that hit you harder than anything else? Well,
there was all of the first-hand testimony from the Coast Guard hearings in Miami originally, and then they went up to Canada to interview the crew of the Finpulp. But there was not, like I said, there was 19 days of testimony, and the Coast Guard essentially seeked out as many of the individual crew members as they could find and as many of the individual passengers. So reading the testimony of the individual people and their experiences was very telling. And there was moments that were remarkable that you wouldn't initially believe from both standpoints. So it was like the captain was the first to abandon ship.
Oh, no.
And then there was,
That's never a good signal, is it?
Never a good situation. Him and the staff captain abandoned ship in the first lifeboat, and they brought the bosun with them, and they eventually picked up 2 passengers.
Well, that was nice of them.
Yeah, but complete breakdown in command. And then you have individuals like one particular woman, Joan Reynolds, who was a passenger that had formerly worked on the ship but had signed up for a cruise. She ended up on the bow. The fire started in the middle of the ship, and she was stranded on the bow with a number of other people. She was a good swimmer, and this is at 1 o'clock in the morning when the fire really got going. She jumps over the side, and the Finpulp and the Bahama Star had arrived, so probably an hour after the fire got going. So instead of swimming to one of the rescue ships, she swam down the side of the ship and was directing. There was another gentleman by the name of Roy Drysdale, who was a waiter and an entertainer on the night floor show. He was hanging down from the boat deck by his ankles, pulling people out of portholes and that were stranded in cabins below on the main deck level. And Joan stayed in the water for a couple of hours, swimming up and down the side of the ship and pointing people that were helping out from above to rescue people in the lower deck staterooms that couldn't get out into the hallways. And she was a passenger. She wasn't a member of the ship's crew.
Wow.
And then finally, when there was nobody else to pull out of portholes, she said, well, I'll swim for the Bahama Star, and started swimming, and then a lifeboat picked her up. But just a remarkable thing. I mean, she was in the water from like 2 o'clock in the morning till about 4:30 in the Bahamas in the middle of the night.
Shit.
You know,
treading water, helping people.
With sharks around. I mean, there's a lot of sharks in the water there in the Bahamas. That was an incredibly courageous thing to do.
Adrenaline just kicked in, yeah.
Yeah, it rose to the occasion.
Massively.
Yeah, just incredibly courageous actions. And Roy Drysdale, he was the captain's abandoned ship, and he's hanging by his ankles from the deck railings over the side and pulling people out of portholes. Again, amazingly courageous.
And your book opens with the night of the fire, so that already will bring people into the story. You mentioned in the book as well, there's an ironic situation with the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of the Yarmouth Steamship Company. Yeah, it turned out that, again, the 6 degrees of separation. I ended up meeting a fella back in October, I guess it was. I went down and did a talk in Florida for some cruise industry professionals that my friend Jeff had put together a group. And after the event that evening, we went to the home of a gentleman that was a retired Royal Caribbean captain, and also Norwegian Caribbean Lines. He was staff captain on the Norway, the SS Norway, and then
went ashore and was the port captain for him and then fleet manager. And he knew Edwin Steffen very, very well. They were friends and colleagues, co-workers for many years. Edwin was the chief operating officer at Yarmouth Cruise Lines and was horrified by what happened, just completely horrified. And he split from them immediately after the hearings took place. And himself and three other Norwegians, he wasn't Norwegian, but three Norwegian ship owners from Norway got together and formed Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines in 1968. And Edwin's idea, he had come from the hospitality industry. His background was hotels and hospitality, not necessarily ships. But what he thought was that instead of using, because the whole industry at that time was using secondhand tonnage, old cruise ships or old passenger ships that were repurposed as cruise ships, he thought that ships should be built brand new specifically for the cruise industry. Shallow drafts so they could get into these various small ports with ease and not be constrained by that. Maneuverable ships, air-conditioned, wide-open decks that would facilitate a fast evacuation if it ever became needed, and essentially brand new ships. And then ships operated by skilled Norwegian crews. And that's essentially what they did. They went to Wärtsilä shipyard in Helsinki, Finland, and they had 3 ships built. The Song of Norway, the Nordic Pride, and the Nordic Prince, I believe it was. 3 ships, sister ships. The first one came out in 1970. And they were all Norwegian crews, professional seafarers, and the ships were purpose-built brand new for this service. So, yeah, he went on to found the Royal Caribbean, essentially a juggernaut, one of the major players in the industry. Yeah, he was a good guy. And this gentleman is Captain Svein Sleipnes, was a Norwegian fellow, knew Edwin very well. And he related to me that whenever there was a hurricane coming for the Caribbean, Edwin would stay at the office and plot the position of the hurricane whenever there was updates. He'd listen to the single sideband radio in the office and get the latest updates. So he knew where all his ships were, and he would monitor the hurricane from the office and plot the position the whole time. He wouldn't go home, he would stay there until he knew that his ships were safe. It's just the kind of guy that he was.
For the listeners who don't know maritime operations, what would you say a piece of ship design or operations prior to 1965 do you think contributed most to the disaster of the Yarmouth Castle burning?
What contributed most was the wooden superstructure. The internal ductwork, much of that for the ventilation ducting was wood also, and that was the single biggest factor of several that contributed to that disaster.
Well, yeah, it wasn't as big. How big is this ship in comparison to, say, the Titanic, which was all steel? The
Titanic was of course a lot larger. The Yarmouth Castle was 379 feet long at 5,000 tons. So right. Yeah, considerably about half the size of the Titanic.
Yeah, but it was a ship that was being treated like a luxury cruise, but on a smaller scale.
On a much smaller scale.
And it was repurposed as a cruise ship from what before?
She was a passenger ship. She was built in 1927 at William Cramp and Son Shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for Eastern Steamship Lines. Her and her sister ship, originally she was called the Evangeline, and her sister ship was called the Yarmouth. And they ran from Boston to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and back and forth in the summer times, and then would do cruises to Bermuda in the winter and occasionally the Bahamas. But she was originally a passenger ship that ran back and forth between Boston and Nova Scotia, Canada.
Okay. Is there a piece of personal gear that if it disappeared tomorrow, you'd feel naked without?
My flashlight and my sextant.
Yeah? You still on the sextant?
Yeah.
Old school, huh?
Yeah.
That's the one that kind of looks a bit like a compass. Has that swinging arch to it.
Exactly.
I don't know how to use it, but I know what it kind of looks like. You don't use... That's the one that you use, what? Is it chart your position based on the stars?
Correct.
That's the one. Alrighty, that's a good one. Good answer. In 50 years, what do you think future mariners will look back at our era and say they were insane for doing it that way? If you could think of anything. I guess they'll be so lost without AI, they won't have ever thought to think for anything for themselves. They'll always be reliant on that 50
Yeah,
years.
probably so. I mean, whatever we do that's still analog, you know.
I mean, my heart weeps for the future because they're not going to have any, like, I don't know, critical thinking, or just like the buzz you get from trial and error of working hard to achieve something, and persevering and being patient. But
Right.
so much instant gratification, and just having a robot tell you the answer is just going to leave people so empty. I
Yeah,
think it's a slippery slope.
it is.
But have you used any AI in your...
No,
No, nothing?
no.
Well, this is coming from the man still using a sextant, so I shouldn't be surprised.
Right.
What's the most beautiful thing that you've ever seen at sea?
There's been a lot of really cool moments, you know, interacting with nature,
Mm.
certainly. Whales, dolphins, manta rays. I remember one time on a long tow, we were going up the west coast of Central America, and myself and the chief engineer were sitting out. It was after dinner, and we're sitting out on the bitts, like up on the forecastle deck, just having a couple of iced teas, and a manta ray, full-size manta ray, jumped out of the water right in front of us and crashed back into the water. Thing was huge, probably 20 feet across.
Wow.
And the chief's name was Willie Free, and he looks at me and Willie goes, "Did you see that?" I'm like, "I couldn't miss it, Willie. It was right in front of us. We got wet from the splash, Just this gigantic manta ray just jumped right out. We were like down off of Costa Rica or something and crashed right in.
So was that like a supersized manta ray? They don't normally
Yeah,
get that. They don't normally get that big.
they get pretty big, and they can easily be. I mean, I don't know how big it was, but it seemed like it was 20 feet across. It might have been 15.
It might have been.
They're big. They're huge,
Might have been a baby.
Yeah.
But it sounds like something out of a scene from the second Avatar movie.
Yeah.
Speaking of movies, if Hollywood calls tomorrow and says we want one of your sea stories to turn into a 2-hour movie, what one are you picking? Are you going with the one you told earlier?
Yeah.
What would you think would make the best screenplay? And did Willie go on to write Avatar?
He didn't go on to write Avatar. He stayed as a chief engineer. Probably one that would be the best screenplay would be 2 books back. My friend Randy wrote a book called Where Divers Dare about the search for the last U-boat. And it was about a group of us that hunted for and located a German submarine called the U-550, which was sunk in April of 1944, 70 miles southeast of Nantucket during World War II. And we called it the last U-boat because it was the last U-boat in diveable waters in the United States that hadn't yet been found. And we found it in 2012. It's in 330 feet of water out by the edge of the continental shelf. And Randy did a terrific job writing a book about it, Where Divers Dare, The Hunt for the Last U-Boat, if you're ever looking for something to read. So that would probably be a really good screenplay.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. And obviously you've got this connection with Jen Saletti.
Exactly.
What's the deepest you've dived? Dove?
Dove. Yeah, the deepest dive I've made is 360.
So you've been down to that one?
Yes.
Yeah, because Jen was telling me she's like she doesn't like to go down too deep, she was saying.
Yeah.
She's a bit more like of a mother hen.
Yeah.
She's an overseer.
Yeah.
But there's some guys who go down as deep as what? Like they've got like the 2 tanks and stuff, or maybe 3.
Yeah, we were diving that, and initially with doubles with open circuit gear, and then eventually we all switched over to rebreathers, which is more practical for the deep diving.
But is there a record? Or, 'cause obviously, if it's on the shelf, it's within reach.
Right.
But there's some that are just, as a diver, you're just like, no, of course not.
Yeah,
There's no
they're
way.
thousands of feet deep, if they're off the shelf, so it's out of diving range.
Yeah. Is there anything if you could get down to, you would want to go and see, like a number one shipwreck?
Well, we found a lot of them, so we have some that are favorites, that we've always enjoyed, like the Carolina and the North American or passenger ships. So it would be cool to go visit some of them in submarines,
Mm.
you know?
Glass bottom boat one.
Yeah, right.
What about Jen's work in the schools? Are you joining her for that as well? Going to
Yes.
schools, you're helping educate the kids as to
Yeah.
the history. That's nice. And you're not doing the tugs anymore, or are you dabbling in that?
I am, yes.
That's the
Yeah.
main thing.
I am. I have one more year left. I leave the day after tomorrow. Saturday, I got to go to Seattle. And
What? So one more? What do you call it?
What-
Contract?
one more year and I'll retire.
Oh, okay. And then by the time this comes out, maybe that'll be like the day after. Depends how long it takes me to edit. But so
Right.
what's the plan for your retirement? Are you gonna put some
Well,
time aside for
I'm
yourself
sorry.
at sea on a different type of boat?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm a marine surveyor, so I'm going to keep doing the survey work. And I'm also a sailor. My wife and I have a sailboat, a cruising sailboat that we'll use more, hopefully,
Yeah.
when I'm retired.
Oh, so you're gonna go around the area where you are currently based?
Yeah.
That
And,
sounds nice.
Yeah, be good.
Well, so that's is it just you and her?
Yes, just her and I. We don't have any kids.
You're not going to have anyone else that you're going to invite aboard?
Some friends, probably, different points in time, yeah.
Different points in time. And the website that you have,
Sure, it's questmarineservices.com.
and what's the website primarily used for? What is it that you have on
It's
there?
for my marine survey business, boat surveying. We do vessel surveys, condition evaluation surveys, damage surveys, hull inspections, that sort of thing.
Cool. Well, listen, it's been absolutely wonderful. I've really enjoyed hearing all your stories, and I'm sure there's many more that we could have heard.
Yeah.
Is there one that you want to sign off on?
No, I'm good for right now.
Until next time, Nolan. Thank
Right.
you so much for your time, Captain. I should call
Thank
you
you,
Captain.
Sam.
No, I should call you Captain. That's your title. We should stick to it. Eric's far too informal. God bless you, mate. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll catch you later on.
Okay, you too, Sam. Take care.
Take care, mate.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So there you have it. That wraps it up for this episode of Deck Tales. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've been entertained by the tales of laughter, camaraderie, and the occasional stormy sea, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. There are lots of other shows out there to compete with, so if you are enjoying Deck Tales, why not help us out by going over to Spotify or Apple and dropping us a 5-star rating? This will boost the show's visibility and help to attract new listeners every week. Before I sign off, if you'd like to share your own stories for future episodes, then I'd love to hear from you. Simply get in touch over the socials, because after all, the best stories often come from our listeners. As we navigate through the waters of life, remember to enjoy the journey as much as the destination, as well as those you choose to share the adventure with. I've been your Captain Sammy Catlin. Until next time, fair winds, smooth sailing, and may your adventures be as unforgettable as those shared here on Deck Tales. Bon voyage! Just so I've got it on recording, how is it you pronounce your surname? Is it Takakjian?
It's Takakjian.
Oh my goodness, I butchered that completely. Takakjian.
Takakjian, yes.
Okay.